Welcome to the State of Music. I'm Paul John Dykes, and I'm delighted today to be joined by Dictator. And I'm speaking to Zach and Michael. How are you doing, guys?
Not bad, thanks. Not bad. Just living the dream.
Living the dream indeed. We're speaking to you as part of the band Dictator. Introduce the band to us.
There you go, Michael.
I'll take this one then. We're basically a group of four pals who've got together, and we kind of formed just before the pandemic started. But we're kind of like an alternative rock band. We've got massive inspiration from like Gorillaz. Gorillaz actually were one of the big inspirations for us starting the band. And what we kind of wanted to do is just challenge ourselves and try and push ourselves musically where we maybe wouldn't feel comfortable before. All of us have been in the world of music for a good probably 5-10 years before this, but we're kind of just really enjoying having a lot more say on what we're releasing instead of feeling like we're stuck in the indie trap, which is quite where some bands find themselves.
Oh, definitely. I remember even back to the kind of late 90s and then moving into the 2000s, or the noughties as they were called back then. And there was that trap. There was so many kind of copycat bands coming on the back of a movement. That always seems to be the way. You know, you had Manchester, then loads of bands come out after Manchester. Then you have Britpop, the same things happen, grunge, and it seems to be copycat bands. So to kind of push yourself and challenge yourself musically, I think the Gorillaz are a great example of that, because, you know, I look at, for example, Damon Albarn and what he's done musically over his entire discography, and he's so adaptable to the times. I mean, you could fit some of his music into baggy Manchester, and then you could fit it right into, as you say, a completely different genre entirely. How important is that to challenge yourself musically, do you think?
It's very important, definitely. It's the whole reason we started this musical project. It's just to completely get out with our comfort zones and push our boundaries as far as we could, and sort of blaze our own trail, if you like.
You know, I've been thinking about some of the big movements through the history of music, and one that always springs to mind is the punk revolution. And, you know, punk for me, people think, right, punk, it's about dyeing your hair green and having a Mohican and wearing leather and all this kind of stuff. But I think the punk kind of ethic is where we are just now. It's all about do it yourself, isn't it? It's about being in a situation like lockdown. I mean, I guess you guys might be known as a lockdown band. You know, you guys have managed to come together and actually progress and get your stuff together during a pandemic, during a very difficult time. And I think punk was a movement. It was a reaction to the political state of the country at that time. Do you think that following on from the pandemic, we will have a movement, we will have this burst of creativity from people like yourself in the arts and music?
So I think we're seeing that already, to be fair, right? So when this all started, the biggest thing for being a band is to play live. That's like your dream when you're a wee laddie and you're imagining playing with your pals. You want to play live, and for us, we've only had a handful of gigs, and that's kind of gutting. However, during this probably last 12 months, we've had to adapt. But what that means is we've had to do things that traditionally musicians don't like doing. So you've had to actually go and learn what do you do on the marketing side? What do you do on the management side? When you're actually pushing things like singles, what do you do with the press there? We've had to really deep dive into it, where traditionally you would have teams of people behind you doing that. So even looking at the most successful, you would normally have like a manager, you'd have a press campaign manager, you'd have a million people. Now, we've had the spare time, thankfully, to just jump into this stuff and 2 foot right into it. And so what that's meant is we've upskilled on things that we wouldn't traditionally associate with music, but that's equipped us for dealing with what happens post-pandemic. So we've had to go and like get uncomfortable by speaking into the screen on Instagram, even doing like Zoom interviews and stuff that maybe would make you feel uncomfortable before. Now it's just the norm. That's what you've got to do. And so I think when we do get back to the grind of of real life when it starts again, I just think there is going to be that flurry of activity where people are so pent up and they're so ready to go because they've been cluing themselves up on how that world works, which has been good for.
Absolutely. Self-sufficiency, you know, because I think back in the day, I'm a lot older than you guys, right? But what bands used to do in my time, you know, when I was at school and just leaving school, is you would write a couple of songs, go and record a demo tape. That's a cassette. an actual tape, get loads of them burnt up, and then send them out to record companies in the hope that an A&R man would like one of the songs and get in touch with you. And then you hoped that someone would come in and deal with all that press and promo and marketing and design and all that kind of stuff. But what we're now looking at is hopefully a whole host of bands who come out the other end, and they've got their own style, they've got their own vision, and also they've got control of what they're doing as well. Because I think so many bands are in the past have been kind of chewed up and spat out by the industry, but it's almost as if the musicians are reclaiming the industry. Would you agree with that?
I totally would agree with that, to be honest. And what you're saying about sort of regaining control, it's something that's really important to us. How we put ourselves out there, how we represent ourselves is very important to what we are doing. So it's great that we've got full creative control. We can put our music out. Our image is exactly who we are. It's not like we're trying to be something that we aren't. We're just fully representing who we are and having that control.
Yeah, I mean, you see, you spoke about Zoom calls. People are dialing in left, right and centre. You know, a year ago, how many people were using Zoom? It's one of these bizarre things that you learn to adapt very quickly. And you see it on the TV all the time. Everybody's sitting there saying, look at all these really funky books that I read behind me on my bookshelf. Let's talk a wee bit more about your influences. I was watching with interest, and we're going to show it later on in the show. We've seen a brilliant acoustic version of your track. And in the background were some tremendous album covers. So talk to us about some of your influences that might have appeared behind you when you were singing that song.
So that's a good question, because I had to pick the specific EPs that I wanted behind me. Now you're going to test my knowledge to make sure I can remember all of them. But I'll tell you, one of the first ones was the Snuts. So the Snuts are a West Lothian band. We've known them for years. West Lothian just seems to be a melting pot for creativity. But to start off with the Snuts, they are quite influential to us. Now it's just because of what they're currently doing and how they're doing it. It's amazing, and it's kind of proven testament to the hard work they've been putting in. It's all starting to come to fruition, and we've all kind of seen them go on that journey, which is amazing. Some of the other EPs there are more musically where we're getting our inspiration from. So there was Alt J there. Alt J, for me, one of my favourite ever bands. They are so we've obviously talked about Gorillaz now. Unfortunately, Gorillaz wasn't there, so I couldn't take their album, right? But with Alt J, I've been to see Alt J 3 or 4 times, and they're another band that's in that ilk where they're not really trying to be part of a copycat trend. They are just saying, like, this is a bit weird. Let's run with it and see what we can do. Mm-hmm. And I've got a lot of time for that, because there's some things that they do musically that you probably would listen to and go, that sounds a bit naff, but they run with it. And as soon as they start running with it and stand behind it, you're like, that's quality. That's you know what I mean? You're kind of sitting there, that's amazing. There's a few others there. So we had London Grammar, just like the singing and the vibe of that band are amazing, because there's almost confidence without being arrogant or cocky. They just know that they've got this. She's an amazing singer, but their music's so relaxed and, like, I don't know, it's really powerful. Which is another thing. I can't remember any of the other ones, but they are the ones. There was Tame Impala. Tame Impala is another one. So that's just one guy. Now that's not dissimilar to how we actually operate as a band, right? I'm not going to claim the glory and say, but I write the majority of them, if not all of them, right? And the way
he's a real dictator, Paul.
I was going to ask, who is the dictator, and it's pretty clear.
So what happens is, I basically, in this little studio that I'm dialing in from, this is where I write the majority of the songs. And what I do is it's just a process where you go in, I maybe form the song, I get the structure, I get exactly how I think it should sound or whatever, and then I bring it to the guys, and then they all add their own parts in. So it's not like Tame Impala where he writes, records, and does everything. We're still a band, and like I think I've got like a lot of, like, Tame Impala are amazing. I draw a lot of inspiration for it. But I also look at it from the perspective of, for us, I think we're better because we all have a part in it. So, like, I think that, like, there's things where you bounce things off of one another, regardless of, like, if someone's not contributing to writing the song. It doesn't matter, because they're steering you in the direction so that the end product is something that all of us have contributed to, regardless if it's just been, like, the structure or whatever it may be I've came with. It's never what it ends up like. which is why I can enjoy it. So
everybody adds their ingredients to it. I mean, we spoke to fairly recently Joshua Grant, who came in and did an unplugged session, and interestingly enough, he also was speaking about the influence the Snuts. He spoke about Luke LaVolpe, and there's other, there's a movement, I feel, of real Scottish talent coming through, ready to burst. I was going to say onto the scene, but I'm not sure what the scene is these days or what it's going to look like once we get to the other end. But I also look at some of the real success stories in Scotland. I mean, I'm a massive fan of bands like Primal Scream, Teenage Fan Club, Las Vegas. There's so many outstanding Scottish bands that you could really pin your colours on as well. But, some of the others, different types, I guess, Paolo Nutini, Lewis Capaldi, and Jerry Cinnamon, who had a real DIY kind of approach to his music as well. See, when you're looking at some of the success of these bands, does that fill you with a bit of confidence that, you could be the next on the big bill come the day where we are able to go back to festivals, for example?
Yeah, it definitely does fill us with a lot of confidence. It's funny, some of those bands that you just mentioned, they were all, the first three bands I think are all creation bands. Mm-hmm. I just finished reading Alan McGee's book, the creation stories, and I think the movie's coming out like next month as well. But I see like those type of artists that just do everything on their own terms and do it successfully and manage to build a fan base. They're definite inspirations to us.
Oh, yeah. And the big thing as well, right? I'm going to throw this one in. They're all Celtic fans. I know Alan McGee wasn't a Celtic fan, but Teenage Fan Club, Primal Scream, and Las Vegas certainly were, and there were others. What do you think that is? I mean, all the kind of cool cats are Celtic fans. What's that all about?
I mean, I didn't know what to say. I mean, maybe the one's been exclusive that they're a Rangers fan for the last 9 years. What it is. But yeah, we've actually we went away and recorded through in Glasgow with the guys who were behind Jerry Cinnamon's album, Celtic fans, and we're just like, oh, yeah, it's just we're like, this is mental. We know so many Celtic fans on the scene, and I don't know why. But that going back to that, like what you were saying around the bands and like doing it themselves. That is massive to us because see, when you're younger, you want a record deal. You're desperate on a record deal. You want to get signed by a label, and see the state of music just now and how things are happening. That's no longer our goal. That's no longer our goal or like our long-term goal. We'd love to work with a label, but those types of guys in that book you just referenced there, those are the things that are changing our mind because that's not something like when you're younger, you just don't really see behind the scenes. Whereas the more you learn about behind the scenes, you're like, actually, that sounds like a bit of a duff one, if I'm honest. It's not something that you're interested in. You basically get a bank loan and get left to your own devices. That's not kind of conducive to a good working environment for a musician. You know what I mean? There's a cash that you've never had before. And for us, I think we're starting to shed a light on that. And that's changing our perception as to what we want as a band. And even during this pandemic, we've been told by a lot of people in the industry not to release any music. Don't release any music. Just sit there, go and record, write songs, whatever, fine. But we're sitting there going, but surely if no one releases music, this is the best time to release music because you're going to be standing out. And it's just things like that where if we were part of a bigger label or had a management team, we would just be shelved. You know what I mean? It would just be a case of not yet, bide your time, hold off. Whether it's having the ability to make some decisions, especially in a time when no one knows what's going on. Referencing those bands, like they're the types of bands who would do that. And that's why they're so big and factored into what we want to do as a band as well.
I have heard this, and I wonder, I've also heard it with the kind of live industry and being reluctant to move into the world of streaming live music. And I think there's a fear within the music industry that you guys, people like you, get so good at being self-sufficient and being able to figure out how to do this yourself, that when the time comes where they would be expecting bands like Dictator to rely on a music publishing company or a record label or a promoter, you guys already know what you're doing. So I do get a wee bit more of a sense that they don't want you to figure it out. They just want you to kind of like wait until everything gets back to normal, then we'll control that for you. So it's great that you are, recording and releasing music, and you were very kind to send me an acoustic version of Moonlight that we're going to play in just a few moments. But before we do that, could you tell us a wee bit about the song?
Yeah, so it's a love song, right? There's no getting away from that, right? It's not something that we normally write, but it's a little bit more poppy than what we would normally be after. But the conception of the song came about because our drummer Alan was actually he was off on paternity, so he just had his second kid, and we as a three were just like we had a session that we had to go and do, and we didn't have a lot of kind of piano ballad type songs, and I was like, we really need to sort something out here, and so I just kind of sat down and was like, it was later on at night, and I was like, I'll just see what I come out with, and literally about 5-10 minutes later, I just came out with the full song. That was it. And then from there on in, it was just like, right, actually, I think we could maybe do something with this. And challenging ourselves musically, that's when we started saying, like, how do we add in some of the layers that we've been talking about and really pushing for? So we got, when Alan came back, he obviously had his synth pad, hence why you hear the drums a lot more digital than we've ever done. So it's kind of, it's just an ode to love. Like, I mean, it's not anything specific. It's not like got a heavy topic. It's just a nice song about a nice topic, you know?
Yeah, and a topic that everybody's going to be able to, for me, it resonates with everyone, doesn't it? That topic, everybody's going to have that experience throughout their life. Now, you said something that's really interesting to me, because when I was speaking to James Allen from the aforementioned Las Vegas, he spoke to me about writing Daddy's Gone, and he said it just kind of fell from the sky. It just happened. And he was actually scared to stop, because if he stopped, he couldn't go back to it, because he had to get it out. And I've heard Noel Gallagher and Shane McGowan talking like that about songwriting as well. Do you feel like that sometimes, that these songs are out there and that you're almost like a conduit, they just come to you? Or is it more of a hard work thing where you need to go back and really work and mould it?
The best ones are just happen. So with Moonlight, genuinely 5-10 minutes. Now, there's songs and ideas that we've been playing with for the last little while. In fact, even the last song we went and recorded took months. Now, that's hard work, but we're challenging ourselves in a different way on that one. And I just think that the best ones, you're right, they just kind of come. And it's just, you feel, because as soon as you start, you're like, I need to stay here until I finish this. I just need to stay here because I like this. And it normally just plays right the way through. But what normally happens is I've got like a million choruses, right? Or just like wee ideas that are either in my mobile, where I'm just recording it in my voice notes, or they're on Logic, which is the audio workstation I use. And I genuinely think when you've got a good song and I don't know, everything just seems to flow. The lyrics seem to just come because you're just sitting there and you go, actually, yeah, I could do this. And within about half an hour, you could go from nothing to a full song. And it never really changes right up until the end moment, which is quite surreal, but it's only every now and then. There's only a few that I've kind of had like that. The rest of them, I really want to try and push through that process. But this one falls into that category.
Well, let's have a wee listen. Here we have Dictator with Moonlight.
I danced with the moon last night under the haze of his light. Intoxicated, we done as lovers do. We dreamed of love and I dreamed of you. Ooh, let me fall in love with you. Ooh, let's take it to be true. I'll be the star. Lost in the haze of light, but we know that we'll be alright. We found the start on our way to the end. We found our own ways and everything again. We found our old ways and everything again. Ooh, let me fall in love with you. Ooh, let's take it to be the stars. You'll be the moon. Ooh, let me fall in love with you. Let's feel too good to be true. I'll be the stars. You'll be the moon.
So there is Dictator with their new single, Moonlight. Before we go on to any further questions, where can we find that song? Where can we download it? Where can we support your band?
You'll be able to get that from all available streaming platforms. So your Spotify, Apple Music, if you use Deezer, it'll probably be on SoundCloud. And soon enough, we will have music videos coming out as well. So you'll get it on YouTube as well.
Brilliant. And we were saying actually earlier on that within the State of Mind studios in Dalkeith in Scotland, we do an unplugged session. We've had to shelf that because of the current circumstances, but Dictator will be coming in to give us a live session at some point in the future, won't you?
Absolutely.
Brilliant. Superb. Now, Zach, who were the band? Who were the band that made you decide, I want to do that?
Oh, it's good. I almost feel like it's cliched to say it now, but because everyone from our generation says it. But for me, it was the Arctic Monkeys. It was always the Arctic Monkeys. They were a couple years older than us when I first picked up a guitar, and they seemed like working class, just like us. Just four young guys that decided to start a band and took over the world. So I was looking at them. They dressed like us. You know what I mean? Everything about them. So it was without question the Arctic Monkeys.
And it was also brilliant, Zach, going back to something we've already mentioned, how they continually challenge themselves and challenge their audience, don't they?
Yeah, definitely. Challenging their audience is a nice way to put it.
The big thing, I always remember reading an interview from Kevin Rowlands from Dexy's Midnight Runners, and people hear that name and think, come on, Eileen. Well, that's fair enough, it was a big hit. But when you actually look at the discography, they constantly evolved, record to record. They never wanted to repeat themselves. And I just think that's key to making it interesting. You just, you could have a successful song or record and continue to repeat yourself, and it's a Xerox of a Xerox of a Xerox. What about yourself, Michael? What band blew you away?
So it's very much in the same vein. So Arctic Monkeys and The View. Now The View and just in the same ilk, they were again working class lads. They were from Dundee. They were not too much older than us, and they just kind of were the main inspiration for picking up a guitar. And when I say inspiration, I mean they were one of the first bands where you're like, actually, me and my mates could just jump into a garage and just start jamming, and we'll see what happens. And we've talked about before where you get a load of copycat bands. I think that's born out of that, where you see someone doing something similar to you and you go, we could try that. And then so what happens is they're your only kind of inspiration, they're your only form. But the more you do it, the more you crack on with it, the more you start realising that actually like The View and Arctic Monkeys are one thing, but have you seen this? And then you start going back in and then you start looking at the older bands and you're like, oh wow, we should try this, we should try that. And then slowly but surely that starts to form your inspiration, you know what I mean?
Definitely. So we're back and live music's back and festival bills are being announced. And Dictator, what is your top 3, your dream festival bill, Zach?
In terms of what we're playing or just who we want to see?
Who do you want to play alongside? So Dictator or headlining? Who's your top 3 bands underneath Dictator?
Oh, I mean, I would love to share the stage with Primal Scream. I know you mentioned them earlier, but I'm a huge fan of Primal Scream, and I've seen them quite a few times, and they always just bring an absolute electric performance. It would be cool to see. It would be cool to share the stage with Primal Scream for sure. And for a third band, we spoke about the Snuts as well, and see, just because they're local bands, and I love to see them doing so well. It would be great to share the stage with them at some point as well.
Brilliant. You mentioned Primal Scream, right? This is this moment where I start name dropping. But last season, when we were allowed to go to the football, I was at the Celtic Lazio game with Andrew Innes out at Primal Scream. Best experience you could ever imagine when we score the second goal and me and Andrew Innes are diving about daft. And I'm looking at him going, I own every record you've ever played on. Brilliant. Michael, what about yourself? What's your dream bill on a festival?
Can I just ask, was that in Rome?
No, it was at Celtic Park.
I managed to get to Rome.
Did you? Brilliant.
I got to go and see Lazio. I was beating Lazio in Rome. I didn't even have a ticket. Got in. I got 2 minutes before the game was due to kick off, and they were checking at every single checkpoint. And luckily, just when they pulled me to the side and said the name doesn't match on the ticket, someone passed it. Someone passed it, and they went, "In you go." I was like, obviously, someone was looking out for me there.
Blessed.
What a place to be in as well. But so basically, for me, the three on the bill, I would go. So there's a band called Fleet Foxes. Now they're a big inspiration for me, but I don't know if you've ever seen them live at some of the festivals, right? But they are like an afternoon band of dreams, where when the sun's shining down and you're just at that position where you're not jumping about crazy and you've just got those bearded gents on the stage, just like, oh, it's amazing. I would love to be on a bill with them, purely so I could just stand at the side and watch it and just get lost in the moment. There's another band that I've really got into since the start of lockdown. They're called Easy Life. Now, just how they operate. Now, again, they're kind of newer, but how they operate is just amazing. Like they're really pushing themselves. They're all multi-talented musicians, so it's like they do a lot of other things, incorporate a lot of things into how they play. And I'd love to see them live. I was due to go and see them live in April, and it got canned. So for that reason, I want to share the stage with them. Lastly, for me, just purely for nostalgia, I would say Arctic Monkeys, right? Because I've been to so many Arctic Monkeys gigs, and to be able to see you share the stage with them, regardless of festival, whatever it may be, that would be my dream lineup. I think there's everything there for how you're feeling, every type of mood.
I look forward to seeing these festival bills being announced and Dictator being on them, I've got to say. I mean, Scotland has this incredible affinity with bands, with venues and festivals. I mean, I went to Tina Park year on year. That became something you just did. You know, we've seen bands rising through King Tut's, going to the Glasgow Barrowlands. So when you guys very soon are on these types of bills, Zach, what's in your rider?
The only thing I'd be fussy about is having some non-alcoholic beers, mate. That's all.
So no blue M&Ms and chai tea and all that kind of stuff. You're not very fussy that way.
No, I couldn't care, mate. I just want to play the show. I just want to play any show. That's all I'm happy about.
I seen, you remember Bonehead out of Oasis, right? I seen him playing a tiny wee gig in Bannockburn years and years ago. And this is when I was starting to get into my music writing, and I managed to secure an interview with him. So I turned up, it was in a venue called McGowans, which I think's still there. I turned up really early to do the interview. He was in a very small band called The Vortex. And his rider was a steak pie dinner and a crate of Tennants. And he pointed to the guitar on the stage and said, that played on the 3 Oasis albums, the first 3 Oasis albums. He's sitting there tucking into steak pie. Brilliant. He offered me a Tennants, but I wasn't having that. Michael, what about yourself? What's in your rider?
So I would probably add just a couple of beers, right? So Zach's kind of alluded, he doesn't drink, so non-alcoholic for Zach. I, from a young age, used to get really fixated on these mad riders that people would have. And then seeing the other side of it, where you see there's people who have to go and provide that. And it's just a pain in the backside. See, because of that, I'm like, look, just a couple of beers and even just, I don't know, a bag of crisps, right? Some simple, because we're no there. We normally go for a meal whenever we're playing a gig, right? And for that reason, because we all want to be together in a different environment before we jump in. So a couple of beers for after the show, I'm happy as Larry.
A friend of mine passed me this thing that he got on eBay years ago, and it was basically the Pogues were playing a gig somewhere in Belgium or something like that, and it was all the paperwork associated with that gig, and there was 3 or 4 pages which was basically dedicated to the rider. So you can imagine, you know, Shane McGowans' Fags and Booze rider was astonishing. You know, I took a wee picture of it and stuck it on Twitter. The next thing you know, it was in the Irish Post. They ran a story on it. Shane McGowans' rider from 1986. But you guys seem as though you are better behaved than that, certainly. Now, Dictator, your new single's coming out. It's out now, and everybody get on to this band. They're going to be superb. They are superb. They're going to explode. And I look forward to seeing you in the studio doing an unplugged session for A State of Mind, and then also on these festival bills you were talking about. Thanks very much for joining us on The State of Music, guys.
Thank you for having us.
Cheers for having us. Thanks very much.